The future is now. Card Ladder is the fastest growing sports card app on the market. The best tools to help you track your cards, watch the trends, stay informed, compare cards, and track the growth of your personal collection. All in one simple and intuitive platform. Join the innovators, not the imitators. The best sports card app on the market. The stock market for sports cards. Card Ladder.
Hey everyone, this is Josh back with Cardboard Chronicles. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Dr. James Beckett. Jim, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Josh. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on. Obviously, a pillar to the hobby, very important to the history of the hobby, the originator of the price guide, and something that's very fond to me, obviously, as one of the creators of Card Ladder. So I look up to you greatly, Jim. So why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your vast background in the hobby.
Well, my hat's off to doers in the industry. I've been a doer, and you are too. I don't think if no one's ever done a price guide or done hard analytics within the industry, which you have and I have, they don't get it. It's a lot more work than people think. And it's also a team effort. I started out with me, myself, and I, a really small team. But as the team grew, I think the excellence grew with it. That's probably how you feel about Card Ladder. So I had a PhD in statistics, so that gave me, and I had some programming experience. So I should have been, Josh, I should have been daunted by the task in front, just as you should have been daunted by the task of trying to put something out like Card Ladder. But I thought, I can do this. This is something that can be done. It's going to be difficult, but I can do it. What I didn't realize is it would turn into be a year-round project that as soon as you get done with one, you got to start with the next one. So it's a never-ending story, never-ending battle, but it's had a happy ending, and it's an ongoing story too. So very blessed to be at the right place at the right time, and probably, as you might say, with the right tools. I love sports and played as much as I can as a kid. And collected heavily. My dad had collected, so just everything lined up and hit the ground running. And I would say I never stopped, but I did sell the company and kind of got my life back because it really was an awful lot of work. And now I'm unretired, but I'm doing a daily podcast. So anyway, yeah, that's it.
I think you've earned the right to do what you want. At this point, if you want to. I love that you're staying involved. I think it's fantastic, and having our historical figures in the hobby still remain active is very important for us, because I think you guys can teach us a lot in terms of where you see the market long term instead of this short window that we're all looking at. So why don't you tell us what kind of motivated you to start with going into the card business from the beginning?
Well, I started as a hobbyist. I didn't really, in the 70s, it wasn't a business. You were trying to fund your collecting habits, and collecting, actually, I probably thought it was expensive back in those days. No, it wasn't expensive then, but it is expensive now. If you're trying to get everything, the collectors back in the 70s, early 70s especially, they wanted to get everything. They wanted to complete all the major sets. And some of them were more particular about condition than others, but that wasn't as big a deal. Superstars wasn't as big a deal. There weren't really rookie cards to speak of. So simpler days. And I enjoyed the ride toward greater complexity. I don't think I was making it more complex other than doing a comprehensive price guide. But, people have always tried to look at, well, if this costs this, then maybe I'm going to buy this instead. So that's been for decades. And so that makes for interesting price structure, fluctuations, movements. So I was a serious collector. And then when I got done with my PhD and I was looking to not conquer the world, but just use it for something, I really thought after I'd done these scholarly papers and I got tenure at the university, so I had a job for life, but I thought that's not as much fun as what I'm having these occasional weekends when I'm going to these card shows And card collectors are really pretty smart. I mean, it helps to be smart because you've got to be aware of the values and the scarcities and the players and the sets and all the stuff. So there's no better hobby out there. When I retire, Josh, what am I going to do? Find a better hobby? There is no better hobby. So yeah, I've enjoyed the ride and the movement into business. I think, and this is what I tell people, is that if you tell me you're in business, rather than asking you what your turnover is or your sales, it's how many employees do you have? That's the complexity of your business. And if you have 0 employees, then you can still have a business. And that's my goal, to have 0 employees, including myself. But when you get a bunch of employees, which some of these businesses have in the industry now, it gets complicated pretty fast. And it's tough. That's what I say when I started in the business aspect. When I was doing shows in the 70s, it was just me. I'd load up, throw some boxes in the car. They didn't take up as much room then, because you're really talking about cards from the 50s and earlier. But it was great fun. It was great fun. So I was making money, but it wasn't business till I hired employees, I think.
So the price guide was really just you at the start, right? Tell us about like the first price guide and how it sort of took off.
Well, I had 5 guys ask me to do a price guide, and that said, you really ought to do this. And none of them had the full vision, but each one of them had an aspect of it. But most of them, other than the last guy, Denny, said, you ought to do a price guide, and I ought to split the profits with you. How does that go again? I'm going to do all the work. Yeah, but and Denny came up to me and he said, look, I know you can do this. I'd known him for a long time, in the hobby. He had a great reputation. He said, I have a distribution business. He said, you're not the distributor guy. I have all this typesetting equipment in my office, and I have this background. And, he said, you make a list of all the things you think are required to do a price guide, a book. This really would be a business. Make a list of all the steps that are required, and then check off the steps that you want to do. And then, make another list of the things you don't want to do, can't do, don't want to do, whatever. He said, I will do all the things you don't want to do. I will do them or get them done. And I have the ability to make it happen. I have a track record. I don't, my word is my bond. So I check it out. Yep. I mean, I'd known it from knowing him, but his word was his bond. And so we started a kind of quasi partnership, a division of labor, for a number of years. He's passed away now, but that got me going. The other guys had great ideas. I mean, so much. And again, going back to Card Ladder, there are a lot of people have had ideas, and they pontificate about what if something, and I could do this, but do it, and then stand up to the criticism that you're not doing it the way somebody else who didn't do it thinks you ought to do it. So yeah. So
that rings very right to
sure.
home, man. I mean, that's exactly how it started for us, and we definitely got criticism on do it this way, that way, and it was kind of like, I must have missed your price guide where you were doing it that way. Tell me about like the boom of the 90s with the price guide, because I grew up in the 90s and I just have very fond nostalgic memories of Beckett magazine and going to the grocery store and picking up the newest issue. What was it like during that time for you and the business, I guess?
Well, let's break it up into three pieces. One is the 90s before 94, before the baseball strike.
Yep.
Okay, it was insane. Okay, I mean, people can say, "Oh, it's junk wax." Well, junk wax means there was a lot of product. It was being sold and being bought and put in garages, a lot of it, but it was hectic. Our circulation was super strong. We were going great. We weren't. PSA was doing great, and we weren't even thinking about doing great because we had our hands full with all these different price guides. All the price guides were doing great. Big 6-figure circulations of all of them, paid circulation. Great sell-throughs and all that stuff. Baseball strike hits. That kind of chopped the baseball magazine in half overnight. So that was a blow. We were still profitable, obviously, but it was like what I always say. And you talk about me being the voice of reason or the sage, the older guy, but there are no sure things in this hobby. Here's the trend line. Well, there's no trend line that takes into account the baseball strike. Okay, so now you
Mm-hmm.
have a baseball strike, which made it, which took some of the fun out of it because you were on this rocket ship, and that was like, oh, wait a minute, I guess there are no sure things. And then we were really, at that point, we really were in a business. But more importantly, the card companies were in, it no longer was order taking. Now, what you see in the late 90s, so this is the third epoch or era. There's the early 90s before the strike, there's the strike. Then after
Mm-hmm.
the strike, it's not been mentioned that much, but it's one of the eras of greatest creativity within the production of cards, bar none. I mean, I can't think of anything. The late 90s, the 96, 97, 98 period after the strike, and it's not just basketball. Basketball is, but all the sports had this kind of renaissance of design in the case hits that I look back in the price guides then, and I think, gee, that seems really cheap. Well, they weren't being sold. They
Mm-hmm.
weren't. When people got those cards, they knew they were rare. They weren't putting them up for. If they were putting them for resale, they didn't have the audacity to charge what they would have been worth. Okay, so the late '90s were kind of a golden age of insert cards and parallel cards, which we've seen which has fueled it's a big part of the fuel of the modern hobby of these outrageous prices. And so that's the 90s to me. Okay. And yet those companies, for the most part, went out of business
Yeah.
because that formula was ahead of its time. Okay.
Yeah, and we have that stuff now to enjoy it even more because it was such a short period and it wasn't like overly produced for 10, 15 years. We can just kind of look back on it now and it's gained value. Did you see my interview with Gene Arena?
Uh, I didn't see it, but I listened to it. Well, actually, I've listened. It's either yours. I've listened to several with the arenas that
Yeah,
are
so that's like that's
they're
the
the
that's
they're
the
the brain,
era, yeah.
the inspiration and the design.
Yep.
Uh, but that magnificent. It's just unbelievable. I mean, the scarcity is one thing, and they're legit scarcity. They weren't contrived. They were intended to be case hits.
Yeah.
But you go looking for them. You couldn't find them then. You can't find them now. You can find them now because the price has driven some of them out. But I may have listened to yours, Josh. I don't know. I you're not. You're more YouTube than podcast, aren't you? In fact, lately
It's
you're doing
it's
card lab.
both. Yeah. I put it on both, but I mean, I'm just thinking like yourself and the arenas, it's just like the mecca of of that era for me. It's like Beckett magazines and inserts and parallels. You guys like how did you guys price some of that stuff knowing that it was like a new thing and how did you go
The
through and
best
try
we
to
can
price it?
as much as possible. And then one thing I appreciate about Card Ladder, I think Card Ladder is. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 100% empirical.
There's some like predicted stuff in there
I know,
based
but
on like
that's
previous
mentioned
ones.
as predicted. But even the predictions are based on empirical data. They're
Yeah,
based on
it's there's
ratios
no
and things
yeah,
like. There's
there's
a
no
formula.
yeah, there's
Okay,
yes.
the problem is you can't have a formula when you're doing a price guide. And we did, after my heart attack, after I kind of stepped upstairs in the price guide, the
Mhm.
guys really decided to not price things explicitly that were so scarce, less than 25, let's say, because they were just there wasn't enough data. And that hasn't bothered Card Ladder because when one sale is one sale and it's worthy of being reported, and we did report those, but to put in an explicit "this is the price," we didn't do that. And so I think when we were doing price guides in the late '90s, let's say mid late '90s, this '97 period, for example, as best as we could, we had the ratios of what was in. But when you didn't see, or if you saw one and you saw what it went for, you had to, we don't want to interpolate or extrapolate, but we were being asked to come up with a price for all the stuff, and we did the best we could. So we're using every bit of it of empirical data we could get our hands on. Again, eBay was not as big a thing then. We were at all the not all the card shows, but we were at card shows every weekend on both coasts and in the Midwest. So we had 19 guys on our price guide team, and somebody was traveling, to the West Coast, East Coast, Midwest every weekend. And then we had all these dealer reps, talking to the dealers and stuff like that. So, but hard to verify. Another thing
Yeah.
Card Ladder's trying to do is put a level of verification. We did too. We couldn't just take somebody when we were at a card show and somebody say, "Yeah, I've been selling these all day long at such and such." Then we go look at their table. Wait, it's still sitting there at this price that's lower than what you're saying. How do it can't be true? And so we try to verify just as you are.
We
But
have it easy. We get to verify online sales and through these big companies. You had to like you were out in the field trying to do this stuff. That sounds a lot more
well, it was
challenging.
hard. It was expensive. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And again, I just again very fortunate. And again, prices weren't moving every day, and we had great relationships with dealers. Some of the guys by having such a big price guide team, many of them had worked in card shops and had a lot of experience. They had their own network of knowing who's trustworthy and who's not. It's just actually I shouldn't say it. Who's what degrees of trust. It's hard to get people to accurately grade their own card or
Hmm.
accurately say what their own card is worth because it's aspirational.
Yeah. What about Beckett grading? Why don't you jump into that just a little bit? Maybe talk about what made you guys want to start getting into the grading business and how that came about.
Well, I actually didn't jump into it. I let them jump into it. My team, I've kind of said this. I mean, I basically had a great team, and I keep talking about how great they are. Well, how come I was the hardhead that waited more than a year to jump into grading? I think there were perceived conflicts of interest, which I think are blown out of
Mm,
proportion. We always were taking into account the grade. We all the guys that were out doing the price guides, they had when they saw a card and it wasn't like I said, they're at the show, it didn't sell. Well, if it's a VG condition, then of course it's not going to be the same price as X Mint or near mint. So we were always grading cards, and we started grading with some of the price guide guys who said, Let us do the feasibility study to show that we can do this." And so, and I just thought, these are some of my very best guys. I mean, what do I need? So I think I was the holdup. And so when
mhm,
we jumped in, it may have sounded like we just jumped in, but we'd been percolating and doing things behind the scenes for more than a year as
mhm.
my really strong team and some of my strongest guys were saying, "We got to do this." And I'd say, "Well, what about this?" And they go back away and they come back with the answer to that. And so we jumped in. We were able to jump in with a slab that had been patented, uh, an algorithm for the grades, and some idea of how to price it in a way that was different than PSA. I delight in being the market leader. I delight in being the prime mover, the first mover. But in grading, we weren't. So I was absolutely not going to be a Me Too grading service. We were going to bring some innovation to it and try to compete strongly with an entrenched market leader that had a big lead on us and had an amazing registry that we never have caught up on the vintage cards. As I say,
One of the thing
the editorial we.
one of the things that I've always admired about the company Beckett and yourself is that you you guys seem to do a little bit of everything. You know, a lot of companies are specializing, especially at that time and today even. And you guys were doing grading, you're doing price guides, you're doing media. Was that something that you intended to do when you started the business to kind of expand and grow? Because I mean, this is something that we think about with Card Ladder is like, do we want to be specialized in this lane or do we want to try to expand?
I I mean, you're putting a good spin on it, Josh, because I had a heart attack in '96. So that's another thing about the '90s, the early '90s, junk wax, baseball strike. I get a heart attack. Late '90s, golden age of inserts, and all that going on. I just at some point, probably after my heart attack, I thought, you know what, this is too Jim centric, too Dr. Beckett centric. My name's on the company. but we had 100 and, less than 200. We never had more than 200 employees.
Hmm.
So we had a bunch of really strong people. And I thought, I kind of need to get out of their way. And so you're bringing it up in a very favorable way of all these things that we did that are still being appreciated and doing well. But we did a bunch of things that didn't work or worked
Hmm.
for a while. And we dabbled in a bunch of things. And again, it was probably me being, I think in the hobby, you're mentioning most of the hobby things that did work because I still understood those things and I could provide vision and direction and know what's crazy and what was doable. But we got into some non-sport stuff. Some of it worked really well, but some of it was a big failure. So we weren't 100%. I just know that people say collect what you like, but it's almost get involved in business that you like or do things that you understand. If you don't understand something, so when my excellent team encouraged me to do things that I didn't really understand, I should have said no. Okay. I didn't say no originally to grading because I didn't understand it. I did understand it. And I just thought, I'm not quite ready for that. Let's make sure we get out there and do it right. And we did. I think we did. But there were some non-sport things we did. I still don't understand it. It didn't work. We lost money. Again, made a lot of money on certain things, but I'm not, people talk about, if you hit 300, 330 or something, you win the batting championship, you're bat 400, you're a legend. But in business, you bat 400, you're losing a lot more than you're winning. And so I want to bat 90%. uh, and we did bat 90% in the industry on a lot of the things,
Yeah.
non-sport, not.
Well, you're being pretty humble about it, but I think the legacy that you've placed on, not just for yourself but in the hobby, I think is extraordinary. So I do want to commend you on all of that, and don't sell yourself too short on some of those things, because I think part of being a good leader is inspiring others to continue to do work around you, and also letting them do that work, right? It's not about like you doing everything. It's having a good team and being a leader, right?
Well, it helps. I mean, again, there's, I can just say, here are the people that used to work for me, and they're sprinkled in leadership positions around the industry, and they're mostly guys. It's not, but we had a lot of outstanding women too. But in the public eye, we're mostly the guys.
Yeah. Well, I'll change it up a little bit. Why don't you tell me what you collect? Tell us maybe what you started collecting, how it's evolved, where you're at today.
I'm trying to collect less, but I think my collecting over the years has gotten more local, uh, in the sense that I have my wall of fame, and I'm trying to add players to that emerge in the public consciousness as well as in the local consciousness. If I have friends that are in this area, somebody went to high school in the area, I'll put a card up on the wall. And so when people come by, I'm trying to have something for advanced collectors as well as something for people that are not, they don't even know about how if you, and again, I don't know if you have binoculars, but if you see my wall of fame, I mean, if there are people with sharp eyes, Adam Gray said, wait a minute, you got Jerry Sloan. And I said, Adam, that's not just for you, but it's, they there could be a card, a $5 card right next to a $500 card, and a non-collector has no idea which is which. They just say,
Hmm.
"Oh, that's interesting," and so it's become. So I've had to figure out. I think I'm going to have some advanced collectors come over and look, or that I'll do pictures or whatever. But I'm going to have non-collectors too, and they're enamored. It's a sports art. It's sports art.
Yeah,
Satchel
totally.
Paige is right next to my right ear, the 53 tops, if you can see it there. Uh, that's an artistic uh, rendition in 53 of an American icon. And people are drawn to that. Um, but four spaces, six spaces from my left ear is Bruno Sammartino, the wrestler. and below him is a green PMG Barry Sanders.
Yep.
So there's
I can
something
see
for
that.
everybody. And
Yep.
then way down in the
I see a
left,
jambalaya.
and there's a couple of jambalayas there. One is that Shack, and then the wait a minute. There's no that's yeah. That's Jermaine O'Neal, then Shack, then Paul O'Neal. This is all alphabetical order. And then below that, oh, go down way down at the bottom. There's Scottie Pippen,
Hmm.
jambalaya. I can't remember which year, 97, 98. Right. And he's just two spaces over from Roddy Piper.
So it's a little bit of everything. You're not doing one
Down
thing, that's
from
for sure.
Bob Pettit. So I'm having fun with that, and so I have these things that I can pop out something and put in another one. So rotating, but my goal is to have less cards every year
Hmm.
because I just I don't want to burden my heirs, my awesome wife especially, with a huge collection. So I'm trying to this stuff, but I'll probably keep the wall. And but some of the boxes of cards that I don't need, I'm not trying to be squeezing the last dollar out of it, but there's certain things you just have to grade. It makes no
Yeah.
sense not to grade. Um, but I'm not, when I look at card ladder, I think, I don't want to enter my collection into card ladder and figure out whether it's going up in value. It's not about that for me. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
obviously into the cards for a lot less than what they're worth now, and I'm selling off stuff that I no longer. I mean, I have too many cards to look at. So
Yeah. It's
I mean,
interesting.
it was in vogue back in the day. People didn't try to have small collections that were elite. They tried to have complete sets and things like that. Well, I've gotten rid of most of the complete sets because they take up a lot of room, and I got rid of a lot of them before I started the price guides because I didn't have room.
Yeah. So what's your take then on the current state of the hobby? You can take that question wherever you want, whether it's pricing or the industry, how it's growing, or wherever you want to go with it.
Well, I'm excited because when you see what's going on with all the money that's coming into the hobby, and not just into the into the cards themselves, but into the infrastructure.
Mhm.
Biden's talking an infrastructure deal, and Republicans and Democrats have a different opinion of what infrastructure means. But when we apply the infrastructure word to the hobby, again, people could have different, but no one can doubt there's a lot of money coming into the infrastructure of the hobby, which are apps, which is technologies, trading systems, fractionals, almost like mini stock markets. So, Josh, I'm hard pressed to see how that's not good. That
Yeah.
people are having more ways to collect and more access to, as we said back in '97, you couldn't even see a Michael Jordan PMG card, much less have one. And so now it's a question. Really, the question's going to be how much of a percent do you want to own of one in order to be able to not be embarrassed about bragging rights that I own 1% of $1 million card?
Right.
It's $10,000, but I own 1%. Do I get to brag that I own 1%? Well, if I had 1,000 shares or 100 shares of Apple, I could brag I've got this many shares of Tesla or Google or Apple. You wouldn't even say that. You just say I own shares of Tesla. Oh, hey, that's great. 2 shares maybe though, or
Right.
Berkshire Hathaway if you're an old guy.
Yeah. Do you think
So
it's
it's
going to keep
another
growing? So
threat.
you think it's good? You think it's going to keep growing?
Well, I think it's not good that it's growing so fast. It's
Mm.
good that it's growing. No, I don't want it when it grows too fast. Basically, one of the challenges you have with card ladder is that there are occasional outliers. And if the outlier becomes the market, then the market will eventually correct. But correction is not a crash, it's just a correction. There are too many alternatives in this industry. Too
Yeah.
many, they're like micro bubbles or something. If something gets perceived to be too expensive, people are going to say, well, I don't think it's all of basketball or all of soccer or anything. In fact, your your technology, y'all's technology really allows you to point to individual cards that may be undervalued.
Hmm.
And so as long as that's going on, that's the safeguard. That's the safeguard. If something's overvalued, then something else will be undervalued. Uh, so I'm not at a point where I want to be just touting that everything is great and it's going to keep going up forever, because there have to be adjustments. And like I said, the herd goes one direction until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, then you're you better be able to pivot. And
Right.
I know a lot of veteran collectors that are my age. If the values dropped in half overnight, they wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over it. They'd
Yeah.
think, well, it's still more than what I paid for it. But if you bought
Yeah.
yesterday and tomorrow's down, then you're so I don't I'm not sure it's a good hobby for day trading. It is now in this bull market, but that's not there are not many collectible things. The true collectors, I think, are not flippers. You know, you can be a collector and an investor, but if you're a collector and a flipper and you have no emotional connection to any card or the cards that you're picking up, well, then it's commoditized. So we'll see. We'll see. I hope it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see just a gentle rise. You know, that's more than inflation. uh, but it doesn't work that way. There's asymmetric rewards. You could lose a little and you could make a lot, and people love those kind of bets.
Yeah. That's wise advice. Well, I'll leave it with this last question. Do you have any advice for a fellow sports card price guide creator?
Uh, um, Yeah, I mean, I think what you've done with Card Ladder is extremely admirable, and I basically would need to take a lot more time to answer that question, and I'm happy to do that. But I think it might bore the non techie people that are listening. But I like what you've done, which I don't feel like I had the luxury to do an incremental, iterative approach to adding cards. I felt like I had, and that first price guide took about a year about 9 months to get everything put together with the checklist and all the cards and all the pricing. What you've done with adding cards, not sporadically, let's say systematically,
Hmm.
um, is a good way to do it, because you're like I said, because you're doing full. I think it's fully empirical. So you've got to make sure you're going to be able to to do it right. So and I think I didn't have to be responsive to individual critics in one sense. You're having people write in and tell you need to do this guy in this condition in this set. And with me, I was just saying, I plan to do all the guys in all the sets in all the years eventually. And we're going to add sets and play as we go. But so I didn't get that complaint, but I'm sure you do, and it's a shame, because I think you're trying to build from a foundation of strength, and that solid foundation allows you to expand. And the more data you have, the more they're kind of network effects, you know, not just in the user base, but in the ability to the more cards you're tracking, the better your ratios can be.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it's just going to
keep
get
up the good
smarter over
work.
time.
Keep up the good work. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I those were there weren't there all the automation and personal computers were kind of just coming in when I started. It makes me sick. But I did my own programming, you know, which is I'm sure way lower than you and Tim Getch and those guys, but it was good enough to get started. And then when I added people, the next iteration, I added some people that really had that skill, that they were fully trained for that. A little bit of a jack of all trades. So
Well, I really appreciate your time today, Jim. This was great. Look forward to chatting again in the future, and hopefully we can do it again.
pleasure's all mine, Josh. Keep up the good work, and look forward to seeing how Card Ladder is going to continue to blossom.
All right, thanks, man.